If you read the central bank data, it shows that the Kenyan economy, we have now borrowed. Our national debt is now over 12.1 trillion Kenya shillings. For the last 3 years, our country has borrowed in excess of 3.5 trillion Kenya shillings. So I would want to request all of us as the leadership, and especially those who have the opportunity to make decisions in the executive. Let us serve our country with dedication. And let us not seek to give good narratives out there when the Kenyan economy is actually being teared down or torn down. We have borrowed over 3.5 trillion Kenya shillings in 3 years. President Kibaki borrowed 1.2 trillion in the entire 10 years he was president. And therefore we have borrowed 3 times in 3 years. We have borrowed 3 times what Kibaki borrowed in 10 years. That's the money Kenya has borrowed in the last 3 years alone. 3 times what Kibaki borrowed in 10 years. And in that money, I have not included other debts that Kenya has now become clever to borrow in the name of something called securitization. I have not mentioned even that. It therefore means the economy of Kenya is borrowing 100 billion every month. And every single day, when the lights go off, every day, every single day, Kenya is borrowing 3.4 billion every day. That we are borrowing in a minute. You can do the calculations and see. In an hour, maybe we are borrowing around 137 every 1 hour. I'm saying this because we are now headed to the elections. And what governments do, they focus more on re-election, and we forget that we have a country to lead after the elections. And what that means is that every time we are nearing elections, we start having something called fiscal expansion. Because maybe there is nothing much to be seen for the past year, then in basically 1 year, we want everything to be seen. And therefore, what do? We become reckless in borrowing. Kenya is there now. That now our debt is 12 trillion Kenya shillings. I want to request that we do not have to put our country.
Kiharu, member of Parliament Ndindi Nyoro, has raised one of the strongest warnings yet about Kenya's growing debt crisis. During a business expo held in Nyeri County, he painted a picture of the country that is borrowing far beyond its ability to sustain itself. His speech was not just a list of figures, it was a detailed breakdown of how deeply the country is sliding into debt and why Kenyans should be concerned. He began by laying out the daily realities of borrowing in simple terms that every Kenyan could understand. According to him, Kenya is now borrowing 3.4 billion shillings every day. When this figure is broken down further, it translates to 140 million every 1 hour. Even more striking, he pointed out that in just a single minute, the country takes on debt worth of 4 million shillings in every 1 minute. He emphasized that this borrowing continues without rest, whether in day or night, showing how constant the problem has begun. To put this in perspective, Nyoro explained that the country's overall debt has now crossed 12 trillion shillings. These figures, confirmed by Treasury and Central Bank data, is an all-time high in the country's history. That make it worse that it is only 3 years the government has ended or added over 3.5 trillion shillings to its debt. By comparing the present to the past, it reminded Kenyans that during former President Mwai Kibaki 10-year tenure, the government borrowed far less. In fact, the amount borrowed in just 3 years is 3 times that Kibaki borrowed in the entire decade. For Nyoro, this comparison highlights the reckless pace of borrowing that has taken hold. He went to criticized the method of government is using to assess new funds. A key concern was securitization, a practice where future revenue are used for collateral borrowing today. For example, funds collected from fuel levies and road maintenance charges are being tied up to secure loans. Nyoro revealed that already 175 billion shillings have been borrowed through securitization of the fuel levy, adding that the Talanta bond has brought in 45 billion shillings. These amounts are not small and they come on top of already ballooning national debt. According to Nyoro, securitization is simply borrowing by another name. He said that while it may look like an innovative way of raising funds, it is in its reality a dangerous practice that mortgage the country's future. The more that the money that will be collected for fuel levies and road charges in the years ahead will be not be available for other services because it has already been committed to repay loans. This, he warned, reduces flexibility and puts the country in a financial chokehold, as future generations will be forced to pay for today's decision. He also expressed deep concerns about how the arrangements are handled. In his view, this is inadequate parliamentary oversight over securitization deals. Normally, any government borrowing should go through parliament so that it can be debated and approved. But with securitization, Nyoro argued that the government is able to lock the country into a long-term financial obligation without open scrutiny. For him, this is a dangerous way of subsiding accountability. Nyoro broke down the impact of this borrowing on everyday Kenyan. He said that while the figures may seem distract and abstract, the effect are felt in rising taxes, higher levies, and the cost of living that keeps climbing. Every shilling borrowed has to be repaid with interest, meaning the true cost of the loans is much higher than what is received upfront. This means that the citizens are the ones who will carry the burden through increased taxation and reduced public spending for essential services. The legislature described the borrowing trend as unsustainable. He warned that Kenya was entirely entering a cycle where new loans are just taken to pay off old ones. This creates a debt trap that becomes harder to escape with each passing year. According to him, the danger of this path is that it leaves no room for the country to respond to emergencies or to invest in meaningful development. Instead, resources are consumed by repayment, leaving less for critical sectors like health, education, and infrastructure.
Borrowing. Kenya is there now. That now our debt is 12 trillion Kenya shillings. I want to request that we do not have to put our country in that kind of pedestal in terms of borrowing. Kenya has always had development for the many years, but we never had to borrow that much. President Kibaki did a lot of development. He borrowed only 1.2 trillion for 10 years. Where is the 1.2 trillion we are borrowing every year going? To make the matter worse, everything you see with your eyes happening in Kenya now, in terms of development, what you can see, for example, the expansion of this Keno Marwa Road, is not even part of the 12 trillion borrowed. Is another column on the side called fuel levy securitization. Everything else you see in Kenya in terms of development, like even the Talanta Stadium, is also not part of the 12 trillion debt. That is another debt, securitization of the sports fund, where we borrowed 46 billion and we'll be paying 100 billion in interest rate alone after 15 years. Even the expansion of Nairobi-Nakuru Road is also not part of the 12 trillion we have borrowed. That is NSSF money being used as a PPP to build that road. I request those who are in government, you have already borrowed 1.2 trillion every year. And even what we can see with our eyes is actually not part of that borrowing. Please, kueni na huruma ya nchi ya Kenya. Even as we preside over the affairs of our country, let us be, tujue kwa akili zetu ya kwamba, there is Kenya after elections. Let us not run our country in terms of overheating it. We must avoid to become like Sri Lanka. We must avoid to become like Ghana. We must avoid to become like Ethiopia. We must avoid to become like Zambia in the recent years. Because Kenya is a strong country with internal resources. This issue of profligate borrowing must come to an end if we really care about this country. Asanteni sana, Mungu awabariki.
Asante sana. I'll kindly request Bwana Mheshimiwa to come back. Ndindi Nyoro, come back on stage here. I would like to present you something.